John Lennon and Yoko Ono wrote, "Imagine there's no countries. It's not a hard thing to do. Except it's pretty hard to do. At least for me, it's a very hard thing to do. Every day, I focus on the invisible lines that divide people around the world. The laws and regulations that keep families apart, and our national immigration system that manages the movement of people from one jurisdiction to another. There are currently more than 22 million registered refugees around the world. If we include those people who do not have the means to register, meaning the people who are forcibly displaced, the number increases to 65 million people. This is roughly the entire population of Great Britain, or the combined populations of Buenos Aires, Istanbul, Lagos, Manila, and Paris. In my office, I help a lot of these people, and I have seen them in their journeys. Sure, we read, we watch the news, and what we see is a glimpse. And often that glimpse is at one of the most precarious points in their journey when they are trying to find a safe border crossing. Occasionally, the news captures some of the tragedy that can occur during these life-threatening journeys. I'm not going to show you the body of 3-year-old Alan Kurdi, a Syrian boy who fled trying to make his way to be with his relatives in Vancouver. These are some British activists who are trying to raise awareness on the risks that people face during these journeys. In my office, I see firsthand how borders, entrenched in history, have a significant impact on people's lives. These people have a genuine fear that they will never find a safe and secure place to live. Borders and security. We put these two words together based on some real, but on largely unfounded fear. Fear of terrorists, fear of the unknown, maybe fear of change. The great philosopher Yoda said, "Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. And hate leads to suffering." In my office, I see a lot of suffering. I see the suffering of people who have fled civil wars, domestic issues, political strife, persecution, and sometimes torture. I've seen the suffering of people who have a genuine fear that they will never find a safe place to live. Yeah, we go through a lot of tissue in my office. I recently had a conversation with a school principal about a family from Venezuela. He was concerned that their documents were not genuine, and he could not imagine that Venezuelans may need refugee protection. In this case, they left behind a house, a business, and many loved ones. They may never be able to return. But they were targeted by the Venezuelan government for writing political songs with an anti-government message. Yes, they are genuine refugees. Now, I don't blame the school principal. Social media is clogged with misinformation and misconceptions about those people who are crossing our borders. One of the misconceptions that I see is that refugees are a security risk. Every refugee claimant is vetted, and every one of them must pass a thorough background check. Another misconception that I see is that all refugees are uneducated. Some have never had access to formal education. Others come with degrees and a wealth of experience. Finally, a misconception that I hear all too often is that refugees are a drain on our social assistance. Notwithstanding the moral and humanitarian reasons for accepting refugees, long-term studies show that refugees pay more in taxes than immigrants who come through the investor stream. Now, I believe that part of the reason for these misconceptions is a lack of personal connections. So I want to share with you a couple stories today. Mathilde fled her country of Burundi during a period of civil war. At the time, she was a university student with a bright future, but her people were persecuted and suffered mass killings. She did not want to leave, but she had to escape. She now works at a national airline, and she has helped dozens of people settle in Winnipeg. Rosalinda and her family fled Chile in the 1970s. The Pinochet regime was brutal. At around that time, more than 200,000 Chileans left their country, and many thousands came to Canada. Rosalinda works as a community legal worker in Toronto, and she has helped literally thousands of people with their legal issues. Now, these are exceptional people, but they're not the exceptions. They are reflective of the positive social, cultural, and economic impact that refugees have on our country. Let's imagine there's no countries. How can we break down the barriers? We've talked about the misconceptions, and we've talked about the positive impacts that refugees have. But what can we do? When refugees make it through the refugee determination system, they need to build connections. They need to build personal connections with members of the community. And this, I believe, will get us closer to realizing John Lennon and Yoko Ono's vision. My story begins in the 1960s. A young graduate student at the University of Chicago disagreed with the policies of her government. She had to do something about it. So she joined the so-called Second Underground Railroad, and she helped American men avoid the draft during the Vietnam War. Estimates show that between 30,000 and 100,000 American men came to Canada under the radar. While she was at the University of Chicago, she met a Canadian PhD student. These are my parents. My mom's passion for justice is one of the reasons why I'm standing before you today. She understood the power of connecting people from different backgrounds. While I was growing up, she was an enthusiastic host to exchange students from around the world. I became an immigration lawyer to help people realize their dreams and overcome border issues. Now, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to connect with a refugee and to learn their story. Our country is built on personal connections between people. Our communities are built on these connections, and this is how we share our culture. To break down the barriers, we need to forge strong personal connections with people around the world so that those invisible lines become obsolete. This is not an easy thing to do, but I fundamentally believe that we're up to the challenge. Thank you very much.